Most people think survival is about strength, but they've never felt what it's like to stay strong when everything inside you is slowly wearing down. It's not the chaos that changes you the most. It's the silence in between. The moments where nothing happens, yet everything feels like it could. And that's where the real story begins. Not in the action, but in what it does to you after. They thought I was gone for good. I actually woke up zipped inside a body bag, lying there on the ground, completely disoriented, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. That moment sticks with you. It changes something inside you. And when I look back on everything that followed, I realize I was stepping into something far bigger than I could have imagined. A fight where, no matter how dark it got, you had to believe that good would come out on top. I grew up in Florida, raised in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, a pilot flying the B-36. He served in both World War II and Korea. After his time in the military, he ended up flying for the CIA, Air America. Back then, you weren't really supposed to talk about that kind of thing, but it's probably all out in the open now. People always assume his service pushed me into the military, but it wasn't like that. I was going to be drafted anyway in 1968, and he gave me some straight advice. If I was going in, I should enlist on my own terms and try for flight school in the Army. That sounded like a solid plan. I did enlist, but the draft caught up with me first. I still managed to qualify for flight training, but there was one problem: my eyesight. That shut the door on flying. They told me I could still serve as a crew chief or a gunner, but I didn't want that. It just didn't feel right to me. So instead, I went into communications school. My MOS ended up being 72B20, which meant I was trained to work in a communications center. I did well too, finished near the top of my class. Because of that, I was given a list of duty stations to choose from, all considered relatively safe, civilian-type assignments. I picked Rome, Italy. Another option was a place in Ethiopia that was supposed to be pretty good. But something in the back of my mind told me none of that really mattered. I had a feeling I was going to Vietnam no matter what I chose. So I put down Vietnam, and that's exactly where I ended up. Every single one of the 240 guys in my class boarded that plane together. We flew into the country around mid-October of 1968. Our first destination was Ton Son Nut, but we couldn't land. The airfield was under attack, so we just circled for what felt like forever before being waved off. Then they sent us to Da Nang. Same story. We circled again, low on fuel, and they still couldn't take us. At that point, the pilot leveled with us. He told us straight, we were running out of options. We couldn't stay in the air much longer. So they redirected us to Cam Ranh Bay. When we got there, it was chaos. Rockets were hitting around the airfield. They tried to wave us off again, but the pilot made the call. We were coming in whether it was safe or not. We hit that runway fast. He pushed the plane all the way down, then pulled it off to the side. Parachutes deployed and we slid to a stop. At the end of the runway, there was a big berm. We climbed over it and dropped straight into a ditch, using it as cover. That ditch led us to a temporary reception area, a tent where incoming soldiers were processed. We stayed there for about half a day while they sorted everyone out. Each of us had orders for different units. Mine was supposed to put me in a communications center with a pretty high-level clearance. I was trained in crypto work, but here's the thing. I never once stepped into a communications center after that. They lined us up and told us our orders were changing. A sergeant came down the line collecting paperwork. When he got to me, I hesitated. I told him those orders were classified, that I wasn't supposed to just hand them over. He looked at me and said, "Son, how long do you want to stand here?" That was all it took. I realized arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere. I handed them over and never saw those original orders again. Just like that, everything I had trained for was gone. Instead, they reassigned me to a line unit, the 198th Infantry Brigade, part of a support battalion. From that moment on, my path changed completely. Whatever I thought my role was going to be in Vietnam, it wasn't that anymore. That part of my story could honestly stand on its own. Back in training, I was still in that same communication school, MOS 72B20. There was another group training alongside us, field wiremen. I don't even remember their exact MOS, but they were the guys climbing poles, like the ones you see working for power or phone companies. Every morning we'd march past them on the way to our classrooms and watch them struggle to get up those poles. It was almost entertaining at the time. We'd laugh and think, no way I'm ever doing that, especially not in a place where people are shooting at you. It felt like the last job any of us would want. Funny how things turn out. The very first real task I got when I arrived was climbing a pole to fix a line. I had zero experience doing it, no real training, no clue what I was doing. All I knew was there were two wires up there. You separate them, splice them back together, tie them off, and then get down as fast as possible. That was it. That was the entire plan. I did that kind of work for a couple of weeks, just long enough to realize I absolutely hated it. Then one night, our compound got hit. That was our first real attack, and after that I made it clear. I didn't want to be out there exposed like that anymore. Standing out in the open, climbing poles while everything around you could turn hostile in seconds. It just didn't sit right with me. They asked me what I wanted to do instead. I told them, anything that doesn't leave me standing out there like a target. So they moved me onto convoy duty. I started riding shotgun on supply runs. Once a week, we'd head about 11 miles south to a place called Duck Fo, where the 11th Infantry Brigade was stationed. That area was no joke. It was a hot zone. To get there, we had to pass through a village called My Lai. This was around November of '68, and every single time we went through that area, we took fire. It wasn't occasional, it was expected. You knew it was coming. People ask what it feels like to be under fire like that. The truth is, it's terrifying at first. There's no way around it. Your body reacts before your mind can even catch up. But after a while, something changes inside you. For me, I reached a point where I just accepted it. I didn't expect to make it back home anymore. It wasn't about being fearless or trying to act tough. It was more like you stop fighting the reality of it. You tell yourself, if it happens, it happens. You won't feel it. You won't hear it. And if you do, you won't remember it anyway. It becomes less about fear and more about getting through each moment. You don't think about tomorrow. You can't. Planning ahead doesn't make sense when you're not even sure you'll be there the next day. Everything becomes about surviving right now. That's it. So I made a decision. Whatever they told me to do, I'd do it. No questions, no hesitation. Even then, I still ended up doing a lot of field wire work, whether I liked it or not. There was one time they dropped us into a landing zone, and I remember looking down at what I had on me. An M79 grenade launcher and a .45 on my belt. That was it. And you just step out into it and keep moving forward. At that point, I wasn't just carrying weapons. I was hauling 2 big rolls of field wire everywhere I went. My job was to run those lines out for claymore mines and basic communication setups. The problem was, when you're doing that, your hands are full. If something kicks off, you can't exactly stop and return fire. Luckily, they usually assigned a couple of guys to move with me, my security, watching my back while I worked. I did that for a while, running wire in places that didn't feel safe for a second. Then it was back to convoy runs again. Same roads, same risks. After a few of those, they came around asking for volunteers to join a unit called Chu Lai Defense Command. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward. I had already met the colonel in charge earlier on, and for whatever reason, he took a liking to me. When my name came up, he approved it. That's how I got transferred. Chu Lai Defense Command was a different kind of unit. It was brand new, barely structured, and honestly, it felt like something thrown together out of necessity more than planning. We didn't have the kind of support other units had. Even established units struggled with supply lines, but at least they had a system. We didn't. Getting what we needed was always uncertain. They set us up in hooches right in the middle of the runway area at Chu Lai. I don't even remember what they officially called that spot. It didn't matter much anyway. What mattered was the job. We were responsible for controlling and securing the entire bunker line around Chu Lai. That line stretched for miles. It ran out toward the river on one side, where the Coast Guard had their position, and then cut across the peninsula before heading down toward the Batangan Peninsula. It was a long, exposed stretch, and we were expected to hold it. The pressure never let up. The enemy was constantly testing us, looking for any weakness. And it wasn't just soldiers coming at us. They used everyone, men, women, even children. Anyone who could get close enough to create a problem was a potential threat. That made everything more complicated because you couldn't rely on appearances. You had to question everything. The rules we operated under didn't make it any easier. They changed constantly, and not always in ways that made sense on the ground. When General Westmoreland took over, one of the first things he pushed down was a strict rule about weapons on the bunker line. We weren't allowed to keep a round in the chamber. Your weapon had to stay clear. You could have your magazine ready, sitting right there, but it couldn't be loaded. And if you thought you saw something, any kind of movement, you couldn't just react. You had to call it in. You'd report it to the officer of the day and wait. Then he'd come down, take a look for himself, and decide what to do. Even then, you couldn't fire a flare to confirm what you were seeing. That was his call too. Everything had to be verified before any action could be taken. The problem was, situations out there didn't wait for procedures. You'd be sitting there, watching something unfold in real time, knowing you might not have the luxury of delay, but those were the rules. And the officers? They understood exactly how we felt. They knew the risk we were taking by waiting, but they were bound by the same orders we were. So you sat there, watching, waiting, hoping you weren't about to learn the hard way why those rules didn't always match reality. The officer had a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. Before giving the order to fire or hold back, he had to be absolutely certain about what he was seeing. And that hesitation, that process of confirming everything, came at a cost. By the time a decision was made, the enemy could already be inside the wire. There were times when the Viet Cong would slip through the perimeter, hit a bunker or two, and disappear. Sometimes a sapper would make it all the way to a hooch and detonate himself. They weren't trying to overrun the entire base. It was too big for that. Their goal was disruption, cause damage, create fear, keep everyone on edge. That was their way of fighting. As time went on, I stopped trusting those restrictions. I started keeping my weapon ready, regardless of the orders. I had already accepted that I probably wasn't making it home alive, but that didn't mean I was going to stand there and let it happen without a chance to fight back. To me, following those rules blindly felt like giving up, and I wasn't willing to do that. A lot of those rules came from people far removed from what was actually happening on the ground. It always made me wonder who they were really written for, because it sure didn't feel like they were made with us in mind. From where I stood, if you're going to fight a war, then you fight it to win. There's no halfway. Life out there became something you lived minute by minute. Nothing beyond that was guaranteed. At one point, I got hit. We were driving when a rocket exploded just ahead of the Jeep. The blast threw us off the road and into a culvert. I was tossed out of the vehicle, and the top of my head was torn open. Everything went black. They must have assumed I was dead, because the next thing I remember, I woke up inside a body bag. It was nighttime. I was lying on the ground next to the wrecked Jeep, which had been completely destroyed and locked up. I didn't understand anything. I just remember thinking, what am I doing here? What happened? My memory was gone. Completely blank. I didn't know where I was, how I got there, or even who I was supposed to be in that moment. It took years, 5, maybe even 7, before pieces of that memory started coming back to me. I managed to get myself out of the body bag and just sat there, trying to make sense of it all. I don't even remember what I was sitting on, maybe a rock. It didn't matter. Nothing made sense anyway. After a while, military police showed up. It was late, and they found me just sitting there. They asked me what I was doing. I told them the truth. I didn't know. They asked where I came from. I didn't know that either. I couldn't answer a single question. Then one of them shined a light on me and noticed the blood. My head was covered in it, dried and tangled. That's when they realized something was seriously wrong. They got me out of there and took me to the hospital. Looking back now, decades later, people ask what that service means to me. It's hard to put into words. I wouldn't say pride in the usual sense, but there's something there, something deep inside. A quiet kind of pride, maybe. I went. I did what was asked of me. I carried my part. But there's also something unfinished about it. A feeling that the job wasn't completed. And when I think about the guys who served in places like Afghanistan, I can't help but feel that they carry that same weight, that same understanding. What stays with you isn't just the moments when things went wrong. It's the constant tension of knowing they could go wrong at any second. You learn to read every sound differently. The wind through the wire, footsteps that don't quite sound right, a movement in the dark that could be nothing or could be everything. Sleep never really feels like sleep. It's more like shutting your eyes while part of your mind stays awake, listening, waiting. Out there, trust becomes complicated. You trust the guys next to you with your life, no question. That bond is solid. But everything beyond that feels uncertain. The environment, the people moving around outside the wire, even the orders coming down sometimes. They don't always line up with what you know to be true in the moment. So you start relying on instinct more than anything. That gut feeling becomes your first line of defense. There's also a kind of numbness that sets in after a while. Not because you don't care, but because you have to keep functioning. You see things, you experience things, and there's no time to process any of it. You just keep moving. It's only later, sometimes years later, that it all starts catching up to you. Little things trigger memories, a sound, a smell, even a certain time of day, and suddenly you're right back there again. The hardest part for a lot of us wasn't just what happened over there, it was coming back and trying to fit into a world that hadn't changed, while you had. People would ask questions, but they couldn't really understand the answers. How do you explain what it feels like to live every day expecting it might be your last? Or what it does to you to lose people and then keep going like nothing happened because you don't have a choice? You carry those faces with you. The guys you laughed with, complained with, depended on. Some of them didn't make it back, and that sticks with you in a way that never really fades. There's always that quiet question in the back of your mind. Why them and not me? You don't always find an answer to that. Over time, you start to make peace with certain parts of it, or at least you learn how to live with it. You find ways to keep going, to build a life, to hold on to the good memories along with the hard ones. But the experience never really leaves you. It becomes part of who you are. And even now, when you look at others who have gone through similar things, even if it's a different war, a different place, there's an understanding there that doesn't need words. You can see it in the way they carry themselves, in the way they pause before answering certain questions. It's like a shared language that only a few people truly speak. At the end of the day, it's not about medals or recognition. It's about knowing you stood there when you had to, that you didn't walk away when things got hard. There's a quiet strength in that, even if it's not something you talk about often. And maybe that's enough to carry forward. Over time, you start to realize that survival isn't just about making it through the firefights or the attacks. It's about everything in between. The waiting, the uncertainty, the constant pressure sitting on your shoulders. That's what wears you down. You can be standing in a quiet moment, nothing happening, and still feel like something is about to. That feeling never really shuts off. You learn to live in a kind of controlled tension. Every movement has a purpose. Every habit becomes routine for a reason. The way you carry your gear, how you position yourself when you sit, even how you look at the ground when you walk, it all becomes second nature. Not because someone is reminding you, but because you've seen what happens when you don't pay attention. There were moments of normalcy, though, small ones. Sitting around with the guys, talking about home, joking about things that didn't make much sense to anyone else. Those moments mattered more than you realized at the time. They gave you something to hold on to, something that reminded you there was still a world outside of all of it. But even in those moments, the reality was never far away. You could be laughing one minute and on edge the next. It didn't take much for everything to shift. A distant sound, a call over the radio, or even just a look between two people who both sensed something wasn't right. And just like that, you were back in it. After a while, you stop thinking too far ahead. You don't think about next week or next month. Sometimes you don't even think about tomorrow. You focus on getting through the next hour, the next patrol, the next night. It's a different way of living, one that's hard to explain unless you've been there. When you finally leave that environment, your body might be gone, but your mind doesn't always catch up right away. You're still wired the same way. You still notice everything. You still react faster than most people expect. Crowded places can feel overwhelming. Silence can feel uncomfortable. It takes time to adjust, and even then, some parts of you never fully go back. You also start to understand things in a different way. What really matters becomes clearer. The small things people worry about don't seem as important anymore. You've seen how quickly everything can change, how fragile life really is. That perspective stays with you. And there's a certain kind of respect you develop, not just for the people you served with, but for anyone who has been through something similar. You don't need long conversations to understand each other. Sometimes it's just a look, a nod, and that's enough. There's an unspoken connection there that doesn't fade. Even with everything, there's still a part of you that would do it again, not because it was easy, and not because you forget the cost, but because of the people. The ones who stood next to you, who depended on you, who made it feel like you weren't alone in any of it. That kind of bond is hard to find anywhere else. And in the end, that's what stays with you the most. Not just the fear or the chaos, but the connection, the loyalty, and the understanding that when it mattered most, you were there for each other. In the end, it's not the battles, the noise, or even the fear that define the journey. It's the strength you discover within yourself when everything else is uncertain. It's the bonds that turn strangers into family, and the moments that quietly shape who you become. You don't walk away unchanged, but you walk away stronger, clearer, and more aware of what truly matters. And maybe that's the real victory, not just surviving it, but carrying its lessons with you for the rest of your life.